But I think one of the big challenges or ways in which we certainly try and help our attraction partners is that you need to really, to take advantage of an app and everything that it can offer, you need to look at it holistically. And I think it's really important that, attractions have a trusted partner on the digital side to help them understand the role of technology within their organization, especially from a guest-facing perspective.
Welcome to the Attraction Pros podcast, where we discuss the latest trends and challenges facing the attractions industry today.
We chat with some of the top leaders in the field and provide resources that will help develop your career in this great industry.
I am Josh Liebman. I am obsessed with the guest experience and helping attractions make that their top priority for success.
And I'm Matt Heller. I am passionate about organizational effectiveness, leadership development, and employee engagement.
Now sit upright, hold on tight, and get ready for the Attraction Pros podcast. Hey, Matt, how's it going?
It's going fantastically. Josh, how are you?
Excellent. Way to turn that into an adverb.
I'm here to challenge the English language.
And I'm channeling my middle school grammar lessons there. Adding ly always makes it I know it's not always, but question for you.
Yeah.
How important do you think a park map is to a theme park, amusement park, zoo, museum, aquarium, any large attraction that guests need to navigate their way around?
Do you want me to answer that as a guest, as an enthusiast, as an operator? So maybe all three. So
yeah, I hadn't really thought that far into it.
Yeah. So I think they're very important. I think having a way to, number one, get information, right, about your visit while you're in the facility, using it as a way to find, show times and, attraction times or, things like that. And then finding your way around, I think is critical. Now, what I've noticed is that in the last couple of times, I've even gone to new parks with enthusiast buddies. We're like, we don't need a map, right? And honestly, we just like to kind of find our way around, and it's worked out for us. Now, we're not traveling with little kids where we need to, make sure we do certain things. We're nonchalantly enjoying the experience. But if we needed more guidance, then the map, I think, would be important. From an operator standpoint, I know that we used to always teach people, as employees, that 99% of the questions that you're going to get from guests can be answered in the map. Right. So have one handy with you, know it back and forward. So I think from that standpoint, a map is critical. And like you mentioned, as we're talking to our guests, from a souvenir standpoint, they can be really important. So those are some of my outlooks. Oh, one other thing I wanted to mention. So they can also be a great guest service tool. You didn't think I was going to go this deep into maps.
Did not. Glad you did.
So one of the things, again, we used to teach a lot is if you see a guest looking at a map, they're probably looking for something or they need some information. So it's a great opportunity to go up and ask them, hey, what can I help you find? What is it you're looking for? How can I help, your experience? And now with a lot of online or digital maps, right, we don't get that opportunity. So when people do have those maps, that can be a great guest engagement opportunity.
Yeah. So speaking of online and digital maps, first of all, thank you for that wide, in-depth analysis of the importance of a park map. I really appreciate you actually breaking it down into all those categories right there. And it ties in fantastically, an adverb, with our guest today, Mark Locker, who is the founder and CEO of Attractions.io, which is a company that builds apps, particularly with park maps, to help theme parks and amusement parks help their guests plan their day better, influence their experience, and be able to see their behavior and get a lot of data and analytics from their guests that ultimately helps them improve decision-making, which leads to higher revenue and profitability.
What's interesting is as maybe more of an old school kind of park enthusiast and experience,
or digital immigrant, as Mark
digital immigrant. I like that one. I may not be as likely to pick up a map or use the app as much as the features that are available. But what I think is really interesting about what he talks about is all those things that I mentioned, except for when the guest has the map out, right? You can get through an app now, right? You can get all that information. But I think what's really cool about the way Mark talks about it is that it's more than a map, right? Thinking about what's the end goal that you have in mind. Do you want people to be able to order food? Well, you can't order food from a paper map, right? You can't get up-to-date wait times from a paper map. There's a lot of things that you can't do with a paper map that you can do through the app, which really can enhance the guest experience. But I also love how he talks about trying to get the app out of the way of the guest experience, because, people have created fantastical, maybe that's a word, lands and amazing experiences that you want people to be immersed into and not looking at your phone all the time, right? The phone should be a conduit to your next experience and creating the shortcut to those things that you want to experience. So I love how he talks about the app kind of getting out of the way of the rest of the experience.
Yeah. And by the way, fantastical is a word according to Alton Towers with their fantastical escapism, also to be discussed in this interview. So this interview with Mark was just really interesting, of being able to look at really the theme park experience from the digital perspective. And the cool thing about Mark too is, like many of us in the industry, started out as a consumer of the product, as an enthusiast of his home park of Alton Towers in the UK, and then being able to see the need to be able to enhance the experience gave him that opportunity, and just a cool startup story of, back in 2008, when Apple really launched the App Store and allowed for developers to build platforms, and when apps were first getting started back during that time frame. So I'm really excited to share this phenomenal interview.
And, one last thing that I wanted to bring up that Mark said was that, from a developer standpoint, that you are not your user, right? Mm-hmm. And really getting out of your own head in terms of what the user really needs is not what you may need, you may think they need as an operator. And actually what that got me thinking of is that as much as we are all attraction pros, right? And as much as we feel like we have a kindred feeling with our listeners, I think sometimes we are not our listeners, and we don't have all the same opinions and thoughts that our listeners have. So I feel like that's a good springboard for us to say, we want to hear more from our listeners, right? Just as the app gives the operators more data, we want to hear more from our listeners. So whether you're engaging with us on socials or you send us an email at attractionpros@gmail.com, we want to hear from you. If you have ideas for guests, if you have ideas for topics, if there's things that you want to hear us explore a little bit more deeply, then we absolutely want to hear from you as well.
And if you enjoy the podcast, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify or on Google Podcasts. That'll help other people find the show, which of course we would love the support from that. But in the meantime, I'd say let's get to this interview, this fantastical interview with Mark Locker. Hey, Mark, welcome to the Attraction Pros podcast. How are you today?
I'm very well. Thank you, Josh.
Excellent. Thanks so much for being here. We're really looking forward to jumping into this conversation. So to get this started, can you tell us a little bit about yourself as well as Attractions.io?
Sure. Yep. So I'm founder and CEO of Attractions.io, which is a mobile app platform for visitor attractions, and being involved really now in the attractions industry professionally for around 15 years, from seeing it from all angles, really. So, in my teenage years, I was very much an enthusiast. I've also worked at attractions on the front line, and now I visit park, obviously, with my two children. So yeah, seeing it from all angles, and that's what we do.
So Mark, how does being an enthusiast and actually working at the parks now inform sort of what you do as someone who builds apps for the parks?
Well, I think it's a useful perspective, right? I mean, like so many others in the industry, my passion really started, well before the 15 years I've been involved professionally. So it was probably when I was 7 or 8 years old that, I really fell in love with attractions in the industry. I remember very clearly sitting in the back of my parents' car, going to my annual trip to Alton Towers, which obviously biggest park in the UK, really. Totally filled with just awe and excitement about what was ahead. I started collecting maps actually when I was sort of 7, 8 years old of the park. And that's what I'd do on the way. I'd just be sitting in the back, looking at the map, be like, wow, this is amazing. I think just to give you a bit of, I suppose, the story of how I got into it and how that shaped my thinking around bringing technology to attractions. That was sort of my earliest memory of attractions, of going on the annual trip to Alton Towers. But then I also, when I got to university, I was studying computing. I'm a software engineer by trade originally, and I spent time again working at Alton Towers, actually on the front line as a ride host and a ride operator, delivering on their brand promise of fantastical escapism for sort of 2 or 3 years. And then I think as founder and CEO of Attractions.io, I obviously also work with some brilliant attraction brands around the world as a supplier to the industry as well. So in terms of Attractions.io and how that weaves into the story, it really got started because of the combination of those passions, really. And I mean, the founding story, you have to go way back to sort of March 2008 for that. So Apple held an event in their headquarters in California. They announced the iPhone software development kit, which was basically the first time that they'd open up their platform so that third-party developers could create apps for their phones. And that very evening, I went round to a friend's house who was also into technology and who'd been visiting attractions with me. We'd actually, I'd started a fan site for Alton Towers when I was 12 years old. And this friend had worked with me on that fan site, helping build up. And we actually had thousands of members. We visited all sorts of attractions together. And it was fun times. But I went round to his house. We downloaded the SDK. It was really late our time as well, because obviously the time difference from California. But we kind of stayed up through the night and built our first app there and then. And because we were running this fan site for Alton Towers, we ended up spending every weekend basically visiting the park and working on the app, figuring out how to sort of show how far it was from the different rides and present different information, show everything on a map of the park. And we actually ended up releasing the first theme park related app to the store, that ranked in the top 10 travel apps. I remember it very, very clearly. And that's how we kind of got into it. So I think the perspective really was born out of, because I was so passionate for the industry and I've always had a passion for technology as well. You could just immediately see the opportunity for how this technology could help with just what I enjoyed doing, which was going and visiting the park. So it really came about from building something that I wish existed. And I think that the real exciting thing about it was, when the iPhone originally launched, and people maybe forget this, but there wasn't an app store, there wasn't GPS. I mean, the original iPhone didn't have a lot, but it was the year after that initial launch, 2008, when they opened up to developers. They added 3G, which gave you fast internet. They added GPS, which meant we could understand where you were. And of course, again, easy to forget, but this was a totally different device than we'd ever had before. It enabled so many opportunities. And for me, just being so passionate about theme parks and visiting them all the time, I could just see so clearly, like, I would love it if there was an app that could help me to find my way around and show how far away things were. And especially Alton Towers, because if I don't know if you've been, but it's incredibly vast, the grounds, and there's a massive gardens in the middle, and it's actually quite hard to find your way around. It's probably a half an hour walk from one end of the park to the other. There's lots of different pathways you could go through. So I could really see the problems that it could solve. And that's really where the idea formed from.
Yeah. Well, you make a good point about Alton Towers being difficult to navigate. I've been there. Actually, I had an opportunity to go through part of their orientation maybe about 10, 11 years ago. So when you said fantastical escapism, that just triggered in my memory that slogan there. But there's that massive ravine in the middle of the park too. So if you don't know that there's that terrain, you might think, okay, I'm going to go from here to here, but not realize that you literally aren't able to do that. So you get the SDK to build the app to put into the App Store. It makes it in the top 10 in the travel related section of the apps. Projecting that a little bit forward, at what point did it become a business? Did you see that there was business opportunity, or at the time you're running a fan site, which actually I ran a fan site for Cedar Point when I was in high school, and I think it fizzled out after I went to college. But now you're able to kind of like leapfrog from one step to the next. Did you see that there was a business opportunity here, or is this an extension of your fan site?
Well, to start with, it was definitely an extension of the fan site. I mean, like I say, it was really just building what we wanted to do when we visited the park each weekend. We thought this would be cool. We could see why this would be useful. We obviously had friends and things who weren't so obsessed with theme parks and didn't know the park like the back of their hand. And so, we were excited about what we could do to help normal visitors. And that's why we got unofficial guides published into the store. And that was the beginnings of it. So it definitely started just as an extension of the fan site and just as a hobby and an interest, and, something that we did for that. And it was probably, I guess, between 2008 time when that obviously kicked off and 2016, that's what we were doing. We did turn it into a business quite early. I think 2009, we actually started turning it into a business insofar as we operated as what I would call kind of a micro agency. So it was actually just me and my friend I mentioned, the two of us doing apps as standalone development projects. So we'd just go and speak to parks and pitch them. In fact, our first customer was a park called Lightwater Valley in the UK. So I think they have around 200,000 visitors a year. It's quite a small park. But we had some connections there, and we went over to them and just said, hey, could we build you an official app for your park? We actually don't want anything for it. We just think it's fun. We want to see if, this would be useful for guests. They were like, yeah, absolutely. So we delivered that. And then we went down the road. I say down the road, it's about an hour's drive, but it's another park in Yorkshire that's much bigger, Flamingoland. We went to them and we said, hey, look what we've done for Lightwater Valley. Would you like to have an app yourselves? They were actually our first paying customer. And obviously the rest, as they say, is history. Only it's kind of not, because that was us operating as a micro agency. We'd go and pitch like any agency would, with a scope and a brief and timelines and cost. And what we saw the business opportunity for really was to turn this into a platform. So we knew that the technology involved that we've been working on for a long time now, with wayfinding, location services, notifications, maps, we knew all of that was actually really hard to do well. And there were some challenges around over-the-air updates and battery life and all these things you had to tackle. And so the idea was that if we could turn that into a platform that was scalable, then it would be accessible to lots of attractions. And it would mean that attractions that I visited day in, day out would be able to do this. I think there's also, attractions aren't technology businesses. So for them to, particularly earlier on, it's become more and more popular, obviously having apps for attractions and things like that. But in the earlier days when it wasn't so popular, it was also just a massive project to undertake to go and do this. They wouldn't obviously do it themselves because most attractions don't have in-house software engineering teams. So they might partner with an agency, but just knowing how difficult that was, as I say, to do, we just saw this opportunity to turn it into a platform, a software as a service model. And so that's what we did. So it was 2016, I quit my full-time job as a software engineer. We moved into some offices here in the UK and started to build out the platform. So that was the beginnings of it, and that's the sort of epiphany we had that seems obvious now,
Yeah. Mark, I love hearing your origin story, how you would go to parks originally and look at the maps, right? And study the maps and figure it out. And now you're building maps, right? So
Yes.
it all kind of comes full circle. I'm curious though, you mentioned something really, really interesting. You said parks are not technology companies, and they probably wouldn't think of this first, at least, years ago when you were starting out. Did you have trouble convincing some folks that they actually needed it?
Yes, I think it's there's some, I've got some interesting thoughts on that, really. I think that it's a big thing that parks aren't technology businesses, and what we've tend to see happens, particularly when you talk about mobile apps, is you might talk to an attraction about a mobile app, and if you think about where that then sits within the organization, it's usually handed off to be like a marketing project, right? They look after a website. Oh, app's another digital channel. They should look after the app. And there's nothing wrong with marketing looking after the app. Like they probably should, because it's an extension of their brand. But I think one of the big challenges or ways in which we certainly try and help our attraction partners is that you need to really, to take advantage of an app and everything that it can offer, you need to look at it holistically. And I think it's really important that, attractions have a trusted partner on the digital side to help them understand the role of technology within their organization, especially from a guest-facing perspective. Because although, yes, Attractions.io is primarily seen as a company that offers a mobile app, and on the surface, that can seem kind of cool. It's all the big parks are doing it, can be useful for certain things. It's a tick box, and yes, we have an app for our park. Really, the app is a means to an end. And what we're really enabling is, I think, two things. You've got one is an understanding of your guests and what they're actually doing, their behaviors whilst they're with you during their visit. And then second, a way of influencing those guests, influencing them to have a better time with you, and also influencing them to spend more money with you. The app really is just the guest interface that happens to stay throughout the whole guest journey. It's the one thing, one piece of technology, one interface that pretty much all of your guests will have in their pocket at the time they book, all the time when they're on site, and when they're back home as well. So, we can really connect everything through that, ticketing, food ordering, hotel check-in, photography, all these things, to make that really useful for the guest. But the other benefit of that then, of course, is because you've connected all of these things and you have an interface with the guest, you're able to understand what guests are doing. You'll be able to personalize that experience, influence the behavior of guests, as I say, so they have a better time, and go on and spend more money with you. So I think getting that picture understood and getting attractions to look at this holistically, not actually as, oh, it's a mobile app, which is just a channel that marketing need to look after, and actually instead looking at it as this is a key piece of our wider digital strategy, really like the linchpin of it, in terms of what it enables. I think that's where certainly we try and help our attractions to get into that way of thinking. And I think because they're obviously not technology businesses, first and foremost, that's something that I feel that attractions, just need some help with. And, what we also want to do is help attractions to do what they do best, in terms of the operation and delivering that guest experience. And ultimately an app and the data it collects and what it enables is another fantastic tool that really resonates with today's digital native visitors, that they can use to do exactly that, and just helping them understand how that fits and how they can leverage that throughout the whole organization, not just marketing, but, operations and guest services and so on, I think is really key.
Yeah.
So you bring up a few really good points here as far as kind of the benefits of the mobile app, of seeing their behavior, influencing the guests to have a better experience, and also to spend more money, and ultimately to improve the experience. Can we expand a little bit on that as far as like the business case of how does this actually help to improve a guest's experience? Because obviously our industry has been around for hundreds of years without a mobile app, but also without a lot of other technology as well that has become critical components of the experience. So at what point does the guest say, does not just the park say, I need the app, but the guests say, I need the app because this is going to help me have a better day? Yeah,
well, I think there's probably two sides to that. One is just the evolving profile of guests. So, you know, 100 years ago, parks didn't have apps, but guests weren't the same. They didn't have the same expectations. They didn't have the same values. One of the things I often speak about is, you know, looking at the cohorts of different demographics of different generations, right? I'm sure we're all familiar with the, you know, Gen X, Gen Y, et cetera, et cetera. I try and look at that in terms of splitting it down the middle into digital natives and digital immigrants. And this is a phrase coined by an academic, but it's basically, if you draw the line at 1984, you can basically say after that point, people who grew up with technology around them, it consumed their lives. You know, if they had a question, then they went and asked Google, or maybe an encyclopedia in the very, very early days. But and that basic idea is that's had a profound impact on people's lives and their expectations. And we know, you know, there's all sorts of data and research out there about differences between different generations. And we know that digital natives expect things to be there more on demand. They care about certain things more, sustainability, etc. These are all things that really tie into a mobile app. And so I think that there's one thing which is understanding your visitors. And, you know, we still get we hear from people who are like, you know what, I don't want people going around my park looking at their phones. And I think that's a very sort of limited view of things. And I get the sentiment of it, and I actually agree with the sentiment of it, because I think primarily you're looking to deliver your experience, what's unique. And so you don't want to detract from that. You want to elevate that. But I think it's not a black and white thing. I think if you're saying, I think you can either fight it or you can sort of embrace it. And I think the smart attractions embrace it because, you know, you're not going to stop it. Like digital natives have grown up and their favorite brands that they interact with on a daily basis. And you can think of all the classics, you know, Amazon, Netflix, Uber, you know, all these services that are around that they're interacting with on their phones, on their televisions, etc. They're all highly personalized. They're all on demand, and you don't have to wait for things. You know, it's very contextual, and they're setting expectations for experiences across everywhere that those people might go, and all the brands they might experience in their lives. And I think attractions are brands that can embrace that and really deliver the same level of digital experience, but do it in a way that can elevate the offering that they're actually delivering rather than detract from it. I think that's, you know, that is something I'm really passionate about, because I think there is often this confusion of it's like a black and white thing. Like we don't want guests going around with their face buried in their phones. And actually, it's interesting because if you go to a marketer and you say, okay, what's a good performance metric to see if a mobile app is doing well? They might say, well, we want as much engagement as possible. You know, we want the average session time to be really high. But actually, when we design for things, we're actually designing for the opposite. You know, our philosophy is around getting out of the way of the guests. So it really is focused on making the most of their experience. So if they want to order lunch to avoid lines, they want to find their way to an attraction, it's like we're helping them do that quicker. We're not detracting away from it. We're not trying to get them glued in, like sat in the corner, sort of glued to their devices. We're trying to facilitate a better experience while they're on site. So that's something I'm really passionate about as well.
Yeah, Mark, I'm glad you kind of went that direction with your comments, because that's something that I think about too. As an enthusiast, as a visitor, I don't want to have my face on the phone the whole time, right? Yes, I want to use it for the things I want to use it for, mobile ordering, like you mentioned, or finding my way around, taking pictures. Obviously, that's a big part of it, the experience. But you know, there's times when I just want to have the phone in the pocket, even turn it off sometimes, and just kind of walk around. And the other part of that is, you know, from the attractions standpoint, they say, well, we put all this time and money and effort into this physical environment. So no, of course we don't want our people like this. But I really appreciate how you say you want to get out of the way, right? The technology should be there to get out of the way, to reduce wait times and to make things more convenient. So I guess the question is, if we could dive a little deeper into that, how do you do that? How do you have this mobile device that can do so much but then design it so it gets out of the way of the experience of just enjoying a day with your family and, taking in all the sights, looking at all the landscaping and the theming that the park has created.
Well, I think you do it in the same way that, digital businesses approach it. And that's what we're trying to really bring into these offline businesses, if you like. So if you think of, let's go back to the example of something like Netflix, their home screen is designed to surface movies and shows that are going to be of interest to you based on what you've previously done in your past behavior, right? What you've shown an interest in, what you've watched before. And the idea is that you can spend as much time watching the content in Netflix as possible, and you're not bogged down like browsing through, like trying to find something that you want to enjoy. So that exact same concept, and that's around personalization, it is something that can be brought into apps at attractions. And, for example, with the apps on our platform, we have this idea of a contextual home screen, and it uses the behavioral information we understand of the guests. So what is their demographic? Are they a family? Are they a thrill seeker? What time of day is it? Because then we know what's going on around. Where are they currently on site? And we can use it to predict what they might be most interested in and just surface that immediately for them so that they're not, digging around in menus and trying to figure out what to do. They're actually getting served intelligent, contextual suggestions. Just to give you some examples, it might be that you go into the app, or maybe it's even a notification that's surfaced to you without you needing to go into the app. But it could be that if I'm going with my two boys and they're really interested in dinosaurs, and there's a dinosaur show that's about to start in 10 minutes time, and it's actually only a 5-minute walk away. That's, the app it knows all of that, and it can surface that information to you. It could be an alert at the top of the screen when you go in, just to let you know that this is something you probably want to check out. And it can give you directions there straight away. And it solved so many things in that one example. So it solved the fact that it's something that's going to probably add a lot of value to your day. It's kind of acting as a VIP tour guide, if you like. If you were with an expert of the park, they'd probably say, hey, do your boys like dinosaurs? There's a show starting nearby in a minute. The app can do that for you, and it can do it then at a scale for every guest. So I think that makes a big impact. And also giving the wayfinding, again, obviously you've mentioned the fact of you being an enthusiast, and I also love the phrase generally of you are not your user. And I think this really applies to attraction operators that maybe are a little bit thinking, we don't want people on their phones. I think the phrase "you are not your user" is really useful, and it's really a user experience. It's got a user experience connotation and background, that phrase, but it applies to everyone, because as an enthusiast, or as me going into Alton Towers, for example, I know it like the back of my hand. I know the directions, the wayfindings, etc. But that's not everyone. Also, I'm visiting and I'm caring about my kids and what they can go on, but other people are just going, they just want the thrills, the spills, So this is the technology, and the role it can play really is through personalization. And I think that's how you get out of the way. You're super relevant, and you're actually just providing tips and hints and bits that help elevate their current experience, or help elevate the experience they're going through, help them to make the most out of their visit, rather than designing it for, you have to just drill down and explore and figure stuff out. It's surfacing stuff to the guests. And that's only possible by being able to track the behavior of what's going on site, of knowing if they're a thrill seeker or they've got kids, or what their interests are, what they've done previously, all of those things I just mentioned. So that's what I'd say to that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, and kind of not to harp on the point even further, but the case of, we don't want guests, walking around the park on their phone. Well, if the app has everything that is listed on the park map and guide, which if you flip over any park map, it's usually it's like a novel you need to read. If it's like it's first aid, there's the restrooms, there's the ATM, like all this. You walk around a park and there's people with their face buried in their map and wondering which way is up, which way is down, basically. So being able to say, you can pull out your phone and be like, where's the nearest restroom? Boom, it's right here. And then especially tying it in with you saying, we're not looking at metrics that increase session times. We want, decrease session times because it means that they've gotten the answer more quickly. I can tell you, even just personally, a couple of weeks ago, I was at Disneyland, and it was my first time at the park since they had, launched their mobile app, and, we didn't get a park map, and I'm looking up, wait times, and that helped determine where I'm going next. And then, we had a lightning lane for Rise of the Resistance, and it went down right before we went there. So I'm checking the app just to see if it's back up, which was helpful and reduced the need for me to go find a cast member or walk all the way back over to that side of the park or look at those wait time boards. So it definitely makes a lot of sense from that standpoint. One of the other things that you mentioned too was about the operator, the park being able to see the guests' behavior and looking at the analytics from that. Can you talk about how that's advantageous for the operator to see whether it's just passive behavior of how guests are using the app or just moving throughout their day?
Sure, yeah. Well, I think there's lots of ways in which data collection is useful. I'll touch on maybe a couple. So the first would be, just behavioral data. So where people are going, what they're doing, and that helps us to understand, what their demographics are as well. So there's kind of two ways you can understand a guest. You can ask them questions about what they do, or you can observe what they actually do. And actually, sometimes you'll find that you can ask someone a question on something, and it won't actually marry up with what they actually do. And so the better way of understanding guests is by their behavior. And so, an app has the unique ability of being able to marry together, I think, all the different systems that are in your park, because, a great app really connects to all those different systems. So whether it be the admission system and it connects as your digital ticket, or it's your point of sale and you can be ordering food through to the kitchen, for example, or it's your photography, so you can view and purchase your ride photos. If you've got accommodation with an attraction, it can be, hotel check-in. It can tie all of these things together. And then what you're essentially doing is you're getting this 360 view of your guest. And, that is most useful really in the context we're talking about it kind of in aggregate, because by understanding the different behaviors of different guests, this is where you can really design that ideal guest experience. So if I layer a couple of examples on here, I think there's, from an operational point of view, you've got things like being able to visualize guest movements across a day. And then if you think that there's other things that you understand, so you could say, okay, let's look at where guests flow throughout the day. So let's identify the key pinch points in the areas of the park. And that can be something that can help you to optimize your staff resourcing, for example, because you can layer that over your staff resourcing levels at different areas of the park to see if there's any discrepancies. But then it's when you start to slice on other bits of information. So you might say, okay, well, let's look and visualize where guests go on a sunny day versus a rainy day. Or let's see where our annual pass or season pass holders, what they do in the morning versus what our day ticket holders do in the morning, or our thrill seekers versus our family guests. So I think, a lot of theme park operations traditionally are based on people who've been there for many years, and they just know the answers to a lot of things, right? They just almost built this instinctive bank of knowledge. I think by actually tracking that through data, there's two purposes that are served. One is that you can start to segment in a lot more detail, so get a higher resolution view of what's actually happening. Because, as I say, you can dissect by what the weather's like or what type of guests there is there, and see how those movements are affected. But also it helps as a communication tool, because within the leadership team in an attraction, all of a sudden, rather than some anecdotal advice from your operations team, you can actually share between all teams visual representations of what's going on. And when that's driving decisions, everyone can understand, why certain decisions are being made and how that's influencing things. So I think that's, in terms of sort of the behavior and the location and slicing and dicing, I think that's super useful. I also think that, you can collect very specific data points from guests that you want and leverage an app channel to do that. So for example, let's say you launched a new restaurant and you wanted feedback on that restaurant and its operation. Well, one of the ways, if you've got an app that you can do that, is you could send a notification every time someone has visited the restaurant as soon as they leave, to say, hey, how was your experience? And you could literally say, hey, alert me when you've collected 100 data points, and we'll analyze the results. So it really, I think the main facilitation is that it allows you to be data driven and really share with the wider team visualizations and data to help you make informed choices based on what guests actually do, rather than anecdotal accounts of things.
Yeah, it's really interesting. In the parks that I've worked at, you could tell that anecdotal experience, right? When I worked at Universal and people would come into Islands of Adventure and it's essentially a circle. Well, it used to be with, before Harry Potter. But you could tell people were going to go to the left because that's where the Hulk was, and they would follow that path. And then depending how busy it was, you could tell what restaurants were going to, by the time, lunchtime came around, if it was really, really busy, the certain restaurant would get most of the business. If it wasn't busy, they get further around the circle. But I think to your point, you've got such a wider scope of data that you can more accurately pinpoint that, which I think is really cool for the operation. But I want to go back to something you said earlier too, kind of a practical question about battery life, right? Because that's an issue with people using their technology. And I know that I either take a charger or an extra case or something like that to make sure I don't run out of power, so I can access the app or take pictures. So is that something that you're consciously thinking of when you're designing your apps?
Yeah, absolutely. It is. I think it's so important. So it's a great question, really, because it's something that we monitor very closely. Just to give you an idea, so we monitor in our platform battery life across all devices. So we basically monitor throughout different hours of the day, like what the average battery life is, what percentage of batteries have depleted below certain levels, etc. And we have that report ran on every release we do, so that we understand if anything we've shipped has, had a negative impact on that. And that is because, exactly as you say, especially because I think the real value proposition to a guest and attraction, and obviously the likes of Disney are doing this well, is it's when everything's connected together, and it's when it's the single touch point that can manage your day. And it's really easy to do that. It's way easier than having to queue up and speak to different people or get on the phone, or it's all there. You can manage your whole day. But of course, if this really is the linchpin of your guest experience and it's where you manage everything, then you're in trouble if the battery runs out, right? That's a real problem. So it's something that you have to pay real close attention to. And I think that's another reason that, we really wanted to create the platform, because if you're trying to build your own app or you're going to an agency to do a custom build, things like this are really difficult. Like, it's unbelievable the amount of hours we spent on trying to optimize things like this, because it's so critical, and it's kind of the non-glamorous side of things. It's like if you go to an agency and you say, hey, we want to build this app with these features, the last thing they're going to think about is, battery life for a theme park. It's but it's something that is so important. So yes, we do. And I mean, in terms of how you can optimize for that, there's lots of different techniques. I think some of the big things is that we're available. We try and be available offline first, and really limit the amount of data we need to pull over the air. So, like on a mobile device, the screen and the radio communication to transfer data, particularly cellular connection, but also Wi-Fi, are the two biggest drains. Obviously, if you have any 3D content that's high in processing, augmented reality or things like that, that's also a big drain. So we really focus on those as the key areas. And yeah, won't get into the technical. There's lots of technical approaches you can take to try and maximize that, but it is something you really do need to monitor, because if you've decided that this is a key part of your strategy, you want to integrate everything in there, then yeah, you better make sure that it's going to be available for the duration of the experience.
So as parks are serving more and more digital natives, those born after 1984, do you envision physical, structural, or infrastructure changes or evolution happening within the parks that supports the digital evolution and services like you offer? So kind of to tie it in with the last question, as far as should parks be implementing charging stations regularly throughout the parks, or maybe it's at the platform of a ride? If I want to take my phone off, or if I have to put it in a locker anyway, wouldn't it be great if it was charging while it was there, so it can help support my needs while I was using the app? Going back to my trip to Disneyland a couple of weeks ago, I said to my wife as we were like getting ready, I was like, I am adamant that my phone is at 100% when we park the car and get out of it, knowing that I'm probably going to use a lot of the battery life here. So what do you envision as far as kind of the physical environment being able to better support the evolution?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult, really. I mean, what we would all love, I think, is for battery technology to eliminate the problem altogether. That would be way better than having to change infrastructure for this particular problem, right, of remaining charged. So I think, we already see this in numerous parks in terms of having charging stations or batteries that you can rent to take around with you, for example. I've been to a few parks where I've seen that now. It's obviously it's a paid service. It's something that it is there if you're running low. But I honestly think, my honest belief is that you can provide something that offers all day battery life with the latest devices. I think there's a real skew towards the damage you can do by having an unoptimized app is massive. And of course, to a guest, like they don't care about like how apps were built or what they're doing technically, etc. Right? Like, to them, doesn't matter. They're just using the app. Who knows what's going on behind the scenes? But like, it's very easy to massively drain a battery. Things like the GPS radio, and as I say, making loads of calls over the network, and it can very easily drain things. Based on our data, the latest devices, and obviously the latest and greatest battery technology, you can already last a whole day. So I think I actually think that I hope that that's not a problem. I actually hope that attractions don't need to do any infrastructure stuff around charging specifically, because I think the advancements of battery technology and hopefully continually evolving, efficient apps, obviously something we really focus on, as I mentioned, should eliminate the need to do that. So I guess, I'm hopeful that that's a problem for the phone manufacturers as well, right? Like that they're doing Apple Pay and Google Pay, and that they want the phone to always be active. They want to make payments on it. So like, I would like to think that the root cause could be fixed in that instance, and we won't need to build out any elaborate infrastructure for it. Although right now, I have to admit that, having a charging station in the lockers would be pretty good.
It just came to mind.
Solving problems wherever he goes. Mark, you've mentioned a couple things about battery life, and I think you called it a non-optimized app. But for people maybe who don't have an app or are looking to get into it, what are some of the common mistakes that app developers make, or that parks even ask for in terms of creating the app that they think, hey, this is going to be great for our guests, but really it's a dud?
Yeah, I think the biggest overarching theme is I think you really need to start with the outcome in mind when you're embarking on a project like this. And as I touched on earlier, you've got to look at it holistically across all areas of your business. And you've got to treat it like a big strategic piece at the center of your digital strategy. And I think if you come at it from an angle where it's any less than that, and actually it's a nice thing for your marketing team to deploy, and sort of it's a nice brochure, but actually the information you could just get from your website or something like that, I think that's where it kind of falls flat. And we work with a lot of attractions where they've come to us, and they're like, oh, we've done an app, and it's not getting, it's not got a great rating, but we think guests kind of like it, and we're like, okay, well, what's your adoption? How many guests are using it? Oh, we don't know. So it's like, I think it's really taking it seriously as a strategic way in which you're going to engage with guests and really take advantage of all the things we've discussed. I think if you've gone to it with the idea of, okay, we want to just launch an app to digitize our map and provide some info on the rides, and you don't think deeply about it, then I think that's where we really find that you don't get the value out of the app, and you end up with something that we see this so often as well, like, especially when they've gone and sort of created their own thing. They've created a brief. They've worked with a partner to deploy an app, and like, it's not been updated for like 3 years. And the App Store ratings are like, oh, this is out of date. This is because there's so much infrastructure behind it as well. Like, you want to make sure that your information is up to date, your map is up to date, so you need mechanisms to do that. And if it's difficult, if it means you've got to go and do some engineering time with the partner or whatever, every time you need to update something, that's going to end up being a problem as well. So I think, start taking it really seriously as a strategic thing is probably the number one, and really focusing on the outcome rather than, what are you trying to drive and how are you going to measure that, rather than just being like, okay, here's some cool features. We just want an interactive map and we want to see, height restrictions. And, I think if you go that level deeper, then that's when you really get the value. And it can really have a massive impact on the business.
So Mark, we're starting to run a little low on time, but a question that I have, and kind of pulling back and even tying it back to the beginning when you said, you were 7, 8 years old in the back seat of the car, looking at the map and studying it and using it kind of as a physical, tangible kind of guide for the park. A lot of people also look at maps as souvenirs as well. And for those watching on video, I've got a 1973 map of Cedar Point back there that I bought on eBay several years ago, but it's one of the coolest things just to look at. And then I was at the park last summer and picked up just a standard paper map that, isn't going to have the same kind of, nostalgia factor to it because it's the standard map. But I also have like boxes full of, of park maps from several parks that I've visited. And being that you began as the enthusiast and kind of also just looking at those maps, how are you best serving 7-year-old Mark as well as the digital natives and the parks and attractions of today?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think you kind of touched on the subject of memorabilia there, and I think there's some great examples of what parks do with that. I do think that in terms of the memorabilia, if you're a child of that kind of age, you can't beat holding something in your hand or having something as a keepsake for your memories and your visit. So I think there's that doesn't have to be fulfilled obviously through a map. I mean, it's interesting because many of the parks we work with now, they've stopped printing their maps, or they have a very low reserve of them, and they've actually used the app to completely replace and go paperless. And obviously there's lots of advantages of that, in it being a better experience, but also helping reduce paper waste and things like that, which is all good. But I think it's about, you talk about memorabilia there, and I think there's some great things. I love like limited edition things as well, and little, so whether it's collectibles, pop badges, little limited edition runs of things. I used to collect all sorts. I'm the saddo who would buy like a Lift Hill chain piece off eBay or something back in the day. So I think those tangible things to sort of have as keepsakes and memory savers, if you like, are still important. I don't think that an app really does anything for that side of 8-year-old me or 7-year-old me. But I think that if you're digitizing a map, there's still plenty of other things that you can take away from a visit to an attraction to remind you of that experience and to cherish and keep in your room and all those sorts of things.
Yeah. Mark, this has been a great conversation, and really appreciate all of your insight and everything you've been able to share. If people wanted to know more about you, they wanted to get in touch with you or learn more about Attractions.io, where would you send them?
Well, of course, you can visit our website, which is attractions.io. You can also email me if you're interested in any of these subjects. I always love talking with peers. So my email is mark@attractions.io as well. You'll find me on LinkedIn, etc. So yeah, always happy to speak with people. So feel free to reach out.
Hey, what does the IO stand for?
Indian Ocean. That is what it stands for. No, it's a weird one because it's the territory of which the domain falls is the Indian Ocean, which is why it's IO. But I think tech startups and tech businesses tend to use it because it kind of alludes to input output, of data. So obviously all the .com domains and everything have gone. So I think, there's a bit of a boom in technology companies using .io. So we did it too.
Awesome. Well, Mark, thank you so much for your time here today. We really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you. And for everyone out there who is watching and listening, just remember, we are all attraction pros.
Thanks for listening to the Attraction Pros podcast.
Make sure to subscribe so you can tune in when new episodes release. And even better, please leave us a review on iTunes.
For more information, visit attractionpros.com.